I want to thank you all for being here. This is the fifth of 6 lectures that our office is sponsoring with 14 other partners that relates to this brochure if you haven't seen it. Nashville Civil War Sites, Common People in an Uncommon War. If you haven't gotten one, they're just outside at the information desk here at the center. We're really excited to welcome Dr. Steve Hoskins, Professor of Church History at Trevecca Nazarene University, here to talk about the Civil War and its impact on American music. And I hope you'll actually make it to our next lecture. It'll be on October 15th. You'll get to hear Dan Pomeroy of the Tennessee State Museum talking about the Unionists, and that'll be at Fisk University. So I hope you join us for that. But we're really excited to have him here. And I also want to note there are a couple of other people here in the audience looking for Carol Busey. She was here. Carol's in the back. She's the Davidson County historian. Carol was very instrumental. She was the lead editor on this brochure and did a great job. And really want to thank her for doing that. And was looking for commissioners, and I don't see one, but with that said, we'll go ahead and get started, and let's welcome Dr. Hoskins.
Well, thank you, and thanks to Tim and the good folks at Metro Historic Commission, and to Carol and Terry Clements is here. We did a lot of good work on that brochure. We're very proud of it. And it's great to be with you. My daughter said, "What are you going to do today?" My daughter has become cool overnight. You know, this happens when your children get to be about 23, they graduate college, they go look for work, and she calls and says, "Dad, do you know who the American Pickers are?" And I said, "Absolutely, don't we all?" And she said, "Well, I now work for them, and you're tragically unhip." And I'm very hip. And I said, "Well, thank you for that." And she said, "Well, what are you going to do today?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to talk about the music of the Civil War." And she said, "You mean the music of your youth?" And I said, "Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate that." Go back to the American Pickers, and where they do unbelievable things, and we're glad they're in Nashville. But anyway, I'm glad to be here today and talk to you about the impact of the Civil War on music in the 5th of these 6 lectures put together by Metro Historic Commission to celebrate the brochure. This is a topic that we latched onto for any number of reasons, not the least of which is because the Civil War music is ubiquitous. When people think Civil War, one of the first things they think of is music. And music has had a very interesting impact on the Civil War in general. And I was not aware of this till a couple years ago when I started doing some research for a class in American church history, and some of my kids started Googling the music of the Civil War. And so they would bring in renditions of Old Dan Tucker by Bruce Springsteen and, you know, Bob Dylan. And I'm thinking, who knew that they were in the Civil War too? But they were. And then they began to show me that the Civil War music was showing up in the soundtracks of, you know, TV shows I had never heard of, reality shows. And of course, you know, that was sort of interesting. But so I said, well, I think there's a little bit more significance to it than, you know, what it's done for you people in the last few years. And so I started doing some research and found some very, very interesting things. And it's very, very interesting things, I think, about Nashville and about Tennessee history, which we'll get through today. The Civil War in song, the soundtrack of the Civil War. Christian McWhirter's book, if you do not know Christian McWhirter's book, McWhirter of last year, called Battle Hymns, popular music in the Civil War, says that the Civil War was the first American war and maybe the first war in human history fought with its own soundtrack. That literally every time a battle showed up, a new song emerged. And every time a new regiment was created, a new sound, a new song, sometimes new instrumentals, sometimes new hymns. But he says that the Civil War emerged with its own soundtrack intact. I thought this was a very interesting thought. After the Civil War. And that one of the things that became very clear in his research, and the more I read about this, and I'll get this in a minute, but is that popular music had a real strong effect on the songs of the church or the songs of Zion. We all think that that's a problem with the worship wars from those awful people who sing contemporary music and have invaded our churches. And this, I can say this to this crowd because we're all tragically unhip. Say hi, I'm Steve. Say hi, Steve. And I've been tragically unhip for some time now. They turn that music on at my church, and I just put the little things in and wait till it's over so that my pastor can preach. And some of you all are laughing because you've been through this yourselves. This was exactly what was going on in the Civil War. That there was a very interesting back and two between the music of the church and the music that the nation needed in order to be what it wanted to be in the Civil War. This is very, very fascinating, and this goes both ways. One of the things McWhorter notes is that in many ways, the creation of music, the writing of music during the Civil War, and I would argue, and I will argue when we talk about Charles Quintard later, who's the second Episcopal Bishop of the state of Tennessee, is that there is a back and two between highbrow music and lowbrow music as to who is going to rule the day. Is it going to be the music that is performed in the chapel? Is it going to be the music of the professional musician? Or is it going to be the lowbrow music of the kids who are playing guitars in coffee shops all over this city, even right now? But the music of people in camps, in Civil War camps. And so there is this wonderful back and two. McWhorter says, and I disagree with this, but I mean, he makes this point, that in the music of the Civil War that emerges as the war goes on, that lowbrow music wins. You know, that's sort of the thesis in America, right? You know, that Hegel was wrong. Everybody remember Hegel. You don't remember Hegel from your college days. But the German philosopher that says everything is progressing and moving forward, moving upward, ever onward. And now the prevailing philosophy is everything is moving downward. And, you know, that bad music always wins. And I don't think you can sort of say that. I think there's an interesting back and two in the Civil War. We'll talk about this some. But mostly what McWhorter says, and I think this is what's important, is songs were tools used by everyone, especially soldiers, but used by everybody, to influence both culture and religion. Songs were the place where morals were expressed. Songs were the place where sentiments were expressed. Sentiments about God, sentiments about home, sentiments about family, sentiments about governments, sentiments about history. And this affects how people act. It affects what they invest in. It affects where they're willing to serve. It affects what they do with their lives. And songs are tools of influence. Particularly in the early days of the Civil War, we're going to find out, what we'll see real quickly, is that songs were used to influence people to go to war. They needed to recruit soldiers. But the same songs are being used by President Lincoln to try and win re-election. And so they have different uses. And so they're used to influence both culture and religion. In the Civil War, one of the things that becomes apparent that's very, very, at the very beginning of the war is what are the national hymns or the patriotic songs that will carry the fervor of the day. And at the beginning of the Civil War, most musicologists will sort of say we had 5 national anthems, okay, that as we headed into the Civil War. There was the Star-Spangled Banner, which no one knew by its right name, but simply called My Country 'Tis of Thee, or America, and they kept mixing these up, which is really interesting. So the Star-Spangled Banner, America. There was Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean. There was Hail Columbia, and then there was Yankee Doodle. And yeah, and these were our 5 national. Isn't that great? You want to talk about highbrow and lowbrow, okay? Just sort of give you that sense of here's what's going on in music is, you know, which of these is most valuable, which of these has the ability to carry the sentiment of the day, to carry the importance of the thinking about the war, the way people felt about the war, and what the people in the North, who I grew up referring to as Yam Dankies, but I didn't say that in front of the camera, but I'm from South Carolina. And you can't say that anymore. And, but what I was taught was that these people just wanted to take over and tell us all what to think. And that's kind of what happens. The people in New York decide this is where all the publishing is going on. This is where a lot of the interesting debates about the war are going on. And in 1861, there is a committee that puts itself together called the Committee for the New National Hymn. And the Committee for the New National Hymn says These songs that we have, the Star Spangled Banner, America, Hail Columbia, Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean, Hail Columbia, I think is also known as Red, White, and Blue, and the Yankee Doodle, they're not good enough for the Civil War. We need a new song. And so they solicit entries. And they just advertise in every paper in New York City. They advertise in the Atlantic Monthly. They advertise anywhere that they think that musicians are going to be. And they get 2,200 entries for the new national hymn. And they're all terrible. In fact, and I won't bore you with the whole story. I'll go through a little bit of it here in a minute. But at the end of the competition, the only thing that emerges is a book written by the committee's chairman called, and I wrote it down here because I wanted to read it to you, was a book called National Hymns, How They Are Written and How They Are Not Written. And that's it. And that's all they had. The songs were so bad that they tried to have a concert in which they celebrated the 10 best songs to see which one. It's kind of like American Bandstand. Get anybody up there to see who claps the loudest. Maybe going to vote for fan of the game. It's Predators game or something. And so they have this concert, and it's so bad people demand their money back. They are panned in every magazine and newspaper in New York City. Some of the songs they say were ludicrous. One person tried to put the entire Constitution to music. And what emerges is this sense that there is a meeting here of singability, lowbrow, what people can remember easily, and then the need for something that has enough gravitas to carry the sentiment. And this is a tough sell in America. I did want to say this though. Two of the hymns that emerged that are really bad in this competition in New York City in 1861. The other part about all this is most of the songs are inflammatory. They're mostly written by Yankees, and they're mostly written to tell everybody what they think of the South. And so here's a couple of the entries. What had caused this great commotion through our land and through our ocean, 'tis Jeff Davis and his boasting band of secession men. We would like to give him powder, we would like to give him powder, we would like to give him powder and blow him out the land. It's just fabulous. But this one is even better. All hail our country great, may she never falter, but every darn secessionist be hung up by a halter. And they sold these songs. Or attempted to sell these songs as new national hymns. And what emerges in this is several things. Is the two-sided national dilemma of the war played out in song. We need a song that everybody can remember, and yet a song that's serious enough to be sung. We need a song that expresses our sentiments, but doesn't inflame the other side to the point where they're not going to speak to us ever again after the war is over. And this is carried out, of course, in Mark Twain's The War Prayer. Some of you, let me go back to that. Some of you may have read The War Prayer, and in this quote from Lincoln's second inaugural address, and here's the dilemma. Both read the same Bible, both sides, right? Both pray to the same God. Each side invokes his aid against the other, God's aid. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. And this is sort of what happens to music. They write songs, they sing songs, but nothing captures the national attention of both sides. And what happens in the midst of that is a really interesting story. The national hymns of the Union, the first great national hymn of the Union is John Brown's Body, if you do not know it. John Brown's Body is one of those songs that everybody thinks they know the story of. John Brown, of course, Harper's Ferry. John Brown, who creates an incredible problem for the United States. But most people don't know that the people in Boston who wrote this song wrote it for a boy in the Bostonian regiment that went to fight in the Civil War named John Brown. Okay? That there was a very happy Scot soldier who was, and you find this all over Civil War music. But this is the John Brown's Body. John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave. His soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. And and it almost seems sacrilegious because we've sung the other version of John Brown's Body for so long, which we all know so well. But this is the song that's written first. And this song shows up in Boston and very quickly in New York, and it's easily remembered, easily sung, and it crosses the highbrow and lowbrow because you have this glory, glory, hallelujah. And whenever you get to that, people who know how to sing break out into parts. And there's something about those lines that have a gravitas. I mean, if you ever heard Elvis sing this, you know exactly what I'm saying. All of a sudden, you know, Elvis became a national icon, a virtual moral, you know, a beacon of society when he began to sing these songs. And everybody's going, no, oh yes, he did. And, you know, and this is the thing about music, is it crosses boundaries real easy in ways that we don't allow. But John Brown's Body, very cool song. It lasted for about a year without anyone in its way. This was the new Union national anthem. This replaced America the Beautiful. This replaced the Star Spangled Banner, and this took the place of Yankee Doodle. Somebody ought to say amen. You know, and this is fascinating. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down. And for his military action, for what he did, he has received approval from God. And now all of a sudden, the national anthem becomes a point of religious theology. It becomes a point of debate. Whose side is God on? And these songs don't leave much to chance or for people to think about. That is to say, John Brown is whose side God's on, according to this song. And the song is loved by soldiers everywhere and hated by all the highbrow Yankees. It's replaced by using the same tune with words by Julia Ward Howe. You all may know the story. She was an ardent abolitionist. She was married to a Boston doctor. They ran a clinic, I think, for blind children. It was blind or deaf children. And they gave all of their money away. I mean, spent all of their time doing reform even after the Civil War. And they go in 1862 to meet Lincoln as the war breaks out. And while they're in Washington, someone says to her, you know, that's a neat song, but it'd sound a lot better if it had better lyrics, more highbrow lyrics. Everybody hear what this is inside the Union. This isn't Northern, Southern. This isn't educated, uneducated. This sense of highbrow, lowbrow, this sense of, does it have the gravitas to carry the freight of something as serious as a war? And yet, is it usable at the very practical level by people? Can they remember it? Will the words stick? And will they understand what they're singing? And so she writes this song, and the 1862 version is really cool. I wanted to read some of it. It's sort of what you get in most of our modern hymnals, but there's some really cool lines in here about the nature of war and the work of God in the world. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the winepress, where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightnings of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. I have read a burning gospel, writ in fiery rows of steel. As ye deal with my contemners, so with you my grace shall deal. Let the hero born of woman crush the serpent with his heel. Our God is marching on. And all of a sudden, John Brown's body gets really, really tough. I mean, all of a sudden, John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave is, as ye deal with my contemners, so with you my grace shall deal. And it becomes a very different sentiment. And it goes on. He has sounded out the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He has waked the earth's dull sorrow with a high ecstatic beat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. And so you have this, you know, incredibly beautiful, stately song that just offers an entirely different set of lyrics and a very different set of sentiment. Because, you know, while God is marching on, and while God is clearly, you know, on the side of what we're doing, you know, God is also wisdom to the mighty, succor to the brave. The world should be his footstool, and the soul of time his slave. That is to say, there's going to be redemption for a whole lot more folks than just people like John Brown. And it's going to be hard to tell, There's a complex philosophical argument here. It may be a little too highbrow, but this is what becomes the official sort of national anthem and religious sentiment of the Union. Likewise, in the Confederacy, we all know this song as the first Confederate national anthem, Daniel Emmert Howe's Dixie, which, by the way, has also been recorded by Bruce Springsteen, which is very interesting. Bruce Springsteen, Emmert Howe also wrote Old Dan Tucker. If you know the Springsteen catalog, he's into all this music. But Dixie is very interesting, mostly for the stuff we don't remember. We remember that it's adopted by Southerners because it has that sort of winsome quality of people who want to go home, who are taken away from the homeland. I wish I was in Dixie in the land of cotton. But the reason that this appeals to Southerners at the beginning of the war is what goes on in the rest of these verses. Let me go back here. Where it says, oh, Mrs. Mary Will the Weaver, Will was a gay deceiver. Look away, Dixieland. But when he put his arm around her, he mild as fierce as a 40-pounder. Look away, Dixieland. His face was sharp as a butcher's cleaver, but that did not seem to grieve her. Look away, Dixieland. Oh, Mrs. Act the foolish part and died for a man that broke her heart. Now, Will the deceiver, okay, who is a weaver, is Abraham Lincoln. He has a chin like a cleaver. Okay, is anybody getting this? And of course, the fact that that this song was written by somebody who'd never met Lincoln, okay, just tells you that God ordained these lyrics to explain to us everything that was wrong with what was going on in the Civil War. And that the Union, and this is a very interesting sentiment, that the Union states are being deceived by Lincoln and the likes of Lincoln. This was Southern sentiment. If they really understood what made this nation great, they wouldn't be deceived by the likes of Lincoln. And of course, this is written for a minstrel show. It's about as lowbrow as you can go in a lot of culture. And it's a tough song if you look at the entirety of it. If all it is just look away, Dixieland, that's one thing. But when it's an explanation of all the problems with Abraham Lincoln and the way he has enticed the country to cleave itself in two, okay? Then all of a sudden things get very, very interesting. That's what's appealing about this song to Southerners. Dixie, of course, is replaced, and Dixie remains popular, people still sing it, but it's really replaced by this song that most of us probably have forgotten, the Bonnie Blue Flag. You may remember that Rhett Butler's daughter's name is Bonnie Blue Butler, and she's named after this song. And Bonnie Blue Flag song is written by Harry McCarthy, the Arkansas comedian. You can see his name there. McCarthy had come to the South and figured out that people in the South like to laugh, and he had figured out how to put on shows. And when he and his wife were attending the Secessionist Convention in Mississippi in 1961, of course, the Mississippi folks came out and they flew a Bonnie Blue Flag, a blue flag with one star. And he looked at his wife and he said, we're going to be millionaires. And so he wrote this song, and the song here, the Bonnie Blue Flag, this is really great stuff. I'm having a hard time seeing it. We are a band of brothers and native to the soil, fighting for the property we gained by honest toil. And when our rights were threatened, the cry rose near and far, hurrah for the Bonnie Blue Flag. And then you'll notice in the second verse, and there are a number of verses after this, they just start naming the states in order of secession. So they start with South Carolina. And as they would sing this song, and he and his wife would go and put on these shows, as they would sing this song, they would implore any soldiers, anybody from South Carolina, stand up. It's the roll call, right? And it's the roll call of honor. And so as they would sing this song, Southerners would get to their feet, and different states would give a hurrah, and different people would give a shout out. And by the end of the time they're done, out comes his wife, out comes Mrs. McCarthy, waving the Bonnie Blue Flag, and the place goes absolutely nuts. And everybody says, this is exactly the kind of song that can carry the freight of what we believe. People are here trampling on our rights. And this is a song that's easily remembered, it's easily sung, and yet if you start up here, We Are a Band of Brothers, it has that wonderful lyrical Shakespearean quality to it. That is to say, here is the combination of highbrow and lowbrow together that can carry the weight. I don't know if you remember this This was an HBO special a few years ago, Band of Brothers. But this is from Henry V and the speech in St. Crispin's Day, one of the most famous speeches in Shakespeare. The story shall the good man teach his son. This is King Henry V at the end of battle, and when victory is imminent or not. But what matters is not whether we win, but it's that we're together and we have fought valiantly, and God has smiled on us. So King Henry V says, this story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the end of the world. But we in it shall be remembered, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me, he shall be my brother. And this kind of thing now begins to make the entirety of the Civil War take on a completely different landscape, because now we're into war. Now it's not like we're just going to go one way and another go another way. All of a sudden, things are happening, and we've got to have songs that reflect the landscapes of our lives. This is what's really interesting about the American experience. This is what I think is really interesting about Civil War music, is we need songs that reflect who we are and what we're doing. And this song is written, and it just takes off like wildfire. One reason is, obviously, is because it names all the southern states. But another reason is because it binds us together in a sacred cause, and it does so in the voice of William Shakespeare. The most important, and I think, easily, other than the King James Bible, the most important voice in the English language. We haven't replaced him yet. They're still doing it in the park over here. You can still go over there for, does it cost anything? And sometimes they do it in cowboy boots, and sometimes they do it in flip-flops, but they're still doing Shakespeare. And that's interesting to me, that this really helps people understand who they are. However, sometimes you have a hymn that fits both sides. And this is one of those favorite stories that the musicologists like to tell. There are songs like Dixie, there are songs like John Brown's Body, and then there is the Battle Cry of Freedom by George F. Root. The Battle Cry of Freedom is a song that represents what happens when the battle cry crosses lines. Battle Cry of Freedom is written by Root in 1862 to support the Union cause. Yes, we'll rally around the flag, boys. We'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We will rally from the hillside. We'll gather from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever. Hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitor, up with the star. While we rally around the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And then you get into this retelling of history. This is where things get really interesting. We are springing to the call with 1,000,000 free men more, shouting the battle cry of freedom. This is resetting the war. It's really interesting. We will fill our vacant ranks of our brothers gone before. That is to say, if you've got more, we've got more too. Okay? This isn't going to be a few little skirmishes, and if you think you can handle as many soldiers as we've got, keep it coming. This is really interesting stuff. The Union forever. The Union forever. Hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitor, up with the star. And most people don't remember the words, but they do know how to sing the battle cry of freedom. And so the musicians learn the words, and everybody else learns to shout the battle cry of freedom. Hurrah, hurrah. And every time you get to it, they go, and everybody goes, the battle cry of freedom, hurrah, hurrah. This is so good. Okay, this song is so ubiquitous, it makes it across the lines of the battlefield. And the Southerners can hear them singing it and start singing it themselves, because this is a song, okay, that really, really is easy to remember. And so, and there's more Union lyrics. And so what happens is the Confederates just write their own lyrics to the same song. And they share this battle cry of freedom. Our flag is proudly floating on the land and on the main. Shout, shout, the battle cry of freedom. Okay? It's really interesting, right? Beneath it oft we've conquered, and we'll conquer oft again. Shout, shout, the battle cry of freedom. Our Dixie forever. She's never at a loss. Down with the eagle and up with the cross. And now we've just decided whose side God is on. Okay? Is everybody sort of hearing this? So these national songs become the songs of religious fervor, and now God has to choose a side. And we're into 1862, and the battles are getting fierce, and soldiers are dying on both sides, and it's pretty clear this isn't going to be a few weeks in home, that this is going to take some time. And these songs are sung to remind people to keep at the task. They're sung to remind people whose side God is on, and to remind people how serious this all is. Oh, gallant boys have marched to the rolling of the drums. Shout, shout, the battle cry of freedom. They have laid down their lives on the bloody battlefield. Shout, shout, the battle cry of freedom. Their motto is resistance. To tyrants will not yield. Shout, shout, the battle cry of freedom. And what's happening here, of course, is that the South is being held up as a worthy opponent of the North in song. If you can write a song, we'll simply take your song and we'll rewrite it and write it better. What's happening here is that if you think yours is the gallant cause, let us help you understand which side the cross is on, which is the truly gallant cause. If you grew up in the South like I did, you grew up learning about the Civil War through Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. Anybody was that your Civil War education the way it was mine? I loved the soundtrack of Gone with the Wind a whole lot more than I ever loved the soundtrack of Ken Burns' Civil War series. I don't know how much you remember about that, but a lot of these songs are in there. Tramp, Tramp, The Boys Are Marching by George Root, who wrote that other one. There are African-American spirituals in that soundtrack, like Go Down Moses. But I wrote this down. Pat Conroy notes in his Reading Life, in his chapter on Gone with the Wind, which is about his mother and Southern women who found solace while living in a fallen Eden. He writes, the Confederacy was a paradise. It was a destroyed civilization of unsurpassable amenity, chivalry, and grace, the moral weight of which is solidly and iconoclastically in line with the gospel according to the Confederate States. And what Conroy means is that the South eventually began to see this, not just as a right, not just as a test of freedom, not just as a test of states' rights, not just as a test to see who has the power to over the will or the deed, but this becomes a religious cause. And Mark Knoll says, the great historian of American Christianity, that the Civil War is a religious war, and that it is religion that emerges out of the crucible of these songs. And sometimes the religion is a national religion. You see a competition for whose side God is on. Is God on the Union side? Is God on the Confederate side? Sometimes that's a clear competition. Sometimes that's just everybody singing the same song and singing it louder. You know, it's who's got spirit? Yes, we do. We've got spirit. How about you? We got spirit. Yes, we got more. We got more. And they just shout louder. You know, it's just like we shout louder than them, then God will hear us, right? And God will answer our prayers. And what emerges as the war goes on is something very, very different. That is to say that in many places where you win battles, religion becomes a matter of the triumph and celebration. But in the South, there's a very different experience. And it's out of that very different experience of walking the long road of the Civil War that Charles Todd Quintard, who is the second Episcopal Bishop of the state of Tennessee, who we'll talk about here more in just a moment, writes these two books, The Confederate Soldier's Pocket Manual of Devotions, and then The Balm for the Weary and Wounded. The first one, both of them appearing in 1863, but written just a couple of months apart. Quintard, by this time in 1863, he had been serving as the chaplain for the Rock City Regiment. If there's any military historians in here, you know they were part of the 1st Tennessee, and they knew him. He had come to Nashville from Memphis in 1857. Quintard is fascinating. He's from Connecticut. His family is not Episcopal. They're French Huguenots. They're Calvinists. They're the kind of French Huguenot Calvinists that are used to fighting in wars for God and country, that they understand what that's about. And so he's lived that, heard the stories all of his life. And he makes his way to college, New York City College, becomes a physician, and upon becoming a physician, somewhere in the late 1840s, he moves to Atlanta, and he falls in love with a woman, and they have 3 kids. And the people in Atlanta enjoy him. He is a good doctor by all accounts. He's a person who contributes to medical journals. and he gets a position as the head of pathology at the Memphis Medical College, what we would today call UT Memphis. And he gets a position there and as the head of pathology, and he contributes to the Memphis Medical Journal, and he writes reports, investigates diseases along the Mississippi River. Very, very interesting guy. But something that is hard to pin down, we don't really know what, happens to him in Memphis, and he ends up being recruited into the Episcopalian clergy, the clergy of the Episcopal Church, a church that was new to the state of Tennessee by a man named James Hervey Odie. And you may know all these names if you're familiar with Tennessee history. Odie is a fascinating character in his own right. Odie brings Episcopalianism to Tennessee. When he preaches in Nashville, there are these great stories out there that are hard to substantiate. Who knows if they're true, and if they're not, we'll tell them anyway, because this is America, and we believe in the liberty-valance rule of history. When the legend and the facts no longer agree, print the legend. And they say that the people in Nashville would say, let's go out to hear that boy preach whose wife is always jawing back at him. And they didn't understand that Episcopalians had a prayer book, and they talked back and forth. They just thought his wife was mouthy. And so the lowbrow people would go to hear this man preach. And Odie was apparently a very practical preacher. He was a very interesting guy. He was not, and he has problems in Tennessee because unlike a lot of traditional Episcopalians in the 1840s and 1850s, he's against pew rents. He gets into a fight with the families who control Christ Church. I need to be careful. I didn't realize we were going to be on camera today. But anyway, he gets into a fight. I have to say it into the camera. And he calls his son-in-law down to be the pastor of Christ Church, Christ Cathedral. And they hate him immediately because he tries to enforce no pew rents. They eventually force his son-in-law out. They can't get rid of the bishop. But they don't have to listen to him necessarily. And so they force his son-in-law out, and his son-in-law starts another church over near the Ryman, over near Fifth Avenue, called Church of the Advent. And he dies before he ever is seated as the pastor, and Odie sends Quintard to Nashville. He is the rector at Holy Trinity Church. This is a wonderful drawing of Holy Trinity that may never have worked out. We don't know if this spire was ever on top of that beautiful chimney of theirs, but that's our Holy Trinity over on 6th Avenue. This was the second Church of the Advent, which today is Ocean Way Studios over on 17th and Edge Hill. It's where Tony Alamo held court when I was a kid. Does anybody remember Tony Alamo and his wife under glass? And as college kids, we didn't have any money, but you could go see that for free. And Alamo was, Alamo was ubiquitous in mall parking lots. Do you all remember getting the Alamo stuff on your car? But anyway, their first site was over there, and then they were here from about 1911 to almost 1960. A man I believe named Purcell was the rector for all those years. It was there, well, maybe from the 30s to the 50s. There a long time. But anyway, Quintard served both of these churches. And Quintard is, so well thought of that when the war breaks out, the people in Nashville who go to war ask him to become their chaplain and to travel with them through the war. And he says yes, despite the fact that he's born in Connecticut, that he has family fighting for the other. You hear what's going on here again? This is the great dilemma of the Civil War. If you go to Smith County and you go to the city cemetery, there are brothers who fought for either side, buried right next to each other, I think head to head, which makes a lot of sense. You can think about it for just a second. But, this is the great dilemma. And he says, well, these are my people, and this is where God has sent me. This is this sort of French Huguenot Calvinism, this sort of resignation to this is God's will for us. We must do our duty. And so he goes with them into battle. And he is magnificent at his job. And he's also a good surgeon. And so, he's not just sort of good to pray with. He's sort of useful after you've been in battle. And so he's good to have around. And this gets around to people. And he travels. And he meets Stonewall Jackson. Okay? He knows Robert E. Lee. He's with Braxton Bragg, okay, and literally not just with Braxton Bragg, but after Chickamauga, he prays Braxton Bragg through. Any Baptist in the house? He prays the boy through. They get down on their knees, and he catechizes him right there in the midst of the battlefield, and he confirms him in the faith and accepts him into the Episcopal Church. And this is his ministry. It's really fabulous stuff. Quintard, very, very, very interesting guy. He depending upon who you read, if you read Charles Reagan Wilson, I'm a big fan of Charles Reagan Wilson. Anybody a fan? He calls him really ugly names. He says he was nervous, and he says he was this, and he says he was that. Other people who knew Quintard just called him energetic. Whatever else he was always doing something. This would prove to be true throughout the Civil War. He preaches everywhere he can go. He becomes rector of a church in Atlanta right before the Battle of Nashville. And when it looks like things are getting heated up here in the Battle of Nashville, the war's getting ready to end, he gets recalled and he leaves his church and he comes here. And while he's not at the battle directly, he's apparently attending to the wounded and the dead. And he attends to the dead soldiers and follows them and with their families buries them after the Battle of Nashville and Battle of Franklin. He's everywhere. He's a really interesting guy. He is absolutely, before the war, a Union sympathizer, and Charles Reagan Wilson says after the Civil War, considering what he's seen, he's the most ardent supporter of the religion of the lost cause one could find. And in him, this great dilemma lives. And the dilemma is played out. There's his grave. He was reinterred at Sewanee. He died in Darren, Georgia. Anybody been to Darren, Georgia? Anybody know where that little fish camp is down on the river before you get to St. Simon's? He went down there to relax. There's a great Episcopalian church there that's built out of tabby. It's the only Episcopalian church, you can talk about lowbrow, that I've ever seen built out of tabby. But anyway, he goes down there, and in convalescing, he has a heart attack and dies, and they bury him. And the people at the University of the South wouldn't have it because, I'll tell that story here in just a minute, because Quintard restarts the University of the South. There would be no University of the South without Quintard after the Civil War. What Polk and Odie had set up had been blown to smithereens, and it's Quintard that goes and raises money. He offers the vice chancellorship, which is, of course, the president of Sewanee. He offers it to Robert E. Lee, who turns him down. So he takes on the mantle himself, and he spends half of his year in Sewanee and the other half in Memphis, being the second bishop, of the state of Tennessee in the Episcopal Church, being seated within months after the Civil War, the first Southern Episcopal bishop seated, because he could speak to both sides. Very, very interesting guy. Odie dies, and Quintard takes his place. We'll tell that story when we get towards the end. These are the books. I'll kind of run through this because I don't want to bore you with all this stuff. But these books are fabulous. Being Episcopalian, these are sort of mini BCPs. I know a lot of Episcopalians who would take a mini Book of Common Prayer. And so there's some good religious laughter in the room. Just cut that sucker in half, and get rid of a few things. But these are great books. They're published all over the South. They're published in Raleigh. They're published in Charleston. They're published in Richmond. They're published everywhere. And there's really interesting stuff, this sort of stuff you need in a Civil War world. There are prayers for safe walking, okay? Prayers for safe walking. Psalm 25:10 is, this is really, really great stuff. Psalm 25:10, I'm looking for it. I wrote it down so I wouldn't misquote it. But Psalm 25:10 is, and I can't find it. Anyway, Psalm 25:10 is the psalm that says, blessed are those who walk, in the ways of keeping a covenant. This is not just necessarily Psalm 1. There's prayers for providence, for trust, for comfort, humility, perseverance, diligence, contrition, hope, and chastity, among other virtues. Now here is the gallant picture that emerges of the sort of Southern soldier, Southern gentleman after the Civil War being played out during the Civil War. There are rounds of morning and evening prayer. There are slivers of sermon, bits of advice. There's attendance tied to duty, and this great sense that we have a number of soldiers who have already done their duty, who have suffered. The Latin title above this is God Our Refuge, Dies Nostra Refugium. And so here is a manual for soldiers as we're winding down the war. There are still prayers here for the hope of victory. This is the first prayer in the manual of devotions. Now may the God of grace and power attend his people's humble cry, defend them in the needful hour, and send deliverance from on high. That is to say, things aren't going so well down here. Could you send some help? Everybody sort of getting this. Quintard's a smart guy, okay? But he's not going to act like we have no hope of victory. because God is on our side. Everybody sort of hear what's going on here? This is really interesting stuff. And there's great stuff here. By the way, you can download that from Google. It's been put out in a new edition by Mercer University Press a few years ago. A guy named, of all things, Sam Davis Elliott is publishing diaries and different things from the Civil War. And this one is out there. Save us, Lord, from slavish fear, and let our trust be firm and strong till thy salvation shall appear, because our salvation is probably not going to work out all that well. So keep us, dedicated until we can sing hymns of peace again. But this is even better. This is a form of thanksgiving after victory. I mean, it's not just sort of the hope of victory, but and this is number 2. Okay, first one is hope of victory. Second one is after we win, here's what we say, and here's how we pray. But immediately after that is Jesus, lover of my soul, let me to thy bosom fly, while the waves of trouble roll, while the tempest still is high. Hide me, O my Savior, hide, till the storm of life is past. Safe into the haven guide, O receive my soul at last. And here is the war being played out in song and in prayer right in front of us. A few victories. We need to know how to behave in victory. We don't want to take advantage of who we are, but let's be honest. Okay? This is 1863. Okay? Let's be honest. There's been a few things here where we've lost and we've not done as well. And so then you have these hymns that begin to show up. For no other reason than probably these are as highbrow, lowbrow as one can be. Everybody knows Nearer My God to Thee. Okay, everybody in the Civil War has heard Nearer My God to Thee. Everybody has sung Nearer My God to Thee. Here are songs you can sing in the Civil War camp that keep the Christian faith alive. Nearer my God to Thee, with my waking thoughts, bright with Thy praise, out of my strong griefs, altars I'll raise, so by my woes to be nearer my God to Thee, nearer to Thee. Just a lovely hymn that we were singing at least until I was 20, and then we don't sing anything anymore. But anyway, they sang How Firm a Foundation. We got some Sacred Harp folks in here, and the Sacred Harp rendition of this is a little different than the one I grew up with. It sounds a whole lot more like that, sort of Scottish Highland music. When I hear Sacred Harp singers, it's actually more beautiful than the hymn that I sort of grew up with. And the Sacred Harp music is taking off, and after the Civil War, the shape note music becomes the standard way of notation and the way of teaching singing in the South. But these are hymns that are just there because everybody knows them. Okay, everybody hear the point? These are hymns there because everybody can sing them. Okay? These are hymns that remind you of home. These are hymns that remind you of how familiar religion is. These are not there for any great reason other than everybody knows these. When I survey the wondrous cross. These hymns are ubiquitous. They're in every hymnal in America. Everybody's singing them. It doesn't matter where you live in America. It doesn't matter who your mama is, who your daddy is. Doesn't matter what part of the country you live in. Doesn't matter your level of education. Everybody's singing them. But then all of a sudden songs begin to show up. Okay? And all of a sudden, you begin to see, make me to fight the goodly fight of faith, down here at the bottom. Make me to fight the goodly fight of faith. And now all of a sudden, Christianity becomes a matter for Quintard of literally of how do I come to grips with the Civil War and with my faith in God. And so you begin to see these hymns that are included because they have clear militaristic references, clear references to the idea of the sacred quest of the war. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, just seems like guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. And we sang this in every church I ever went to as a kid. But they sang it because be my sword and be my shield. Feed me with the heavenly manna in this barren wilderness. And God, while we're here, be my sword, be my shield, be my banner. And so now we're singing these songs of Zion as a way of interpreting what we're going through in our experience of the Civil War as a soldier in a military camp. Everybody sort of see what's going on in here? So you got some things that are just there because they're comfortable. But then you have these hymns that show up that have clear, they're not even double entendres. I mean, this is how we're going to interpret our place in this conflict as Southerners. One that may not be quite as familiar, but you can just tell from the title, Am I a Soldier of the Cross? Am I a soldier of the cross, a follower of the Lamb? And shall I fear to own his cause or blush to speak his name? That is to say, even if we lose as Southerners, we all know God's on our side, right? American by birth, Southerners by the grace of God. Okay, everybody knows this, right? We know this. And so, thank you so much. I was just wondering where I was for a little bit. It's like, do you people ever laugh? I mean, it's like, well, anyway. I'm going to be in enough trouble as it is. But this is great stuff. Thy saints in all this glorious war shall conquer though they die. Even if we lose, we win. This is really great, theology of war. This is the great religion of the lost cause. This will last, and I probably still last. In the South that I live in, the South that I grew up in for sure, South Carolina, Virginia, in great war states. Tennessee, I didn't grow up here. I came here to go to college. But the places where I grew up, this is still the religion. In the Episcopalian Church, I couldn't name a church like Holy Trinity in Virginia. Holy Trinity is an Episcopal church that's an African-American church. And it's been an African-American church for 100 years. It's where some of the civil rights movement was fought. We were hoping to be there today, but the city has stolen their parking. So pray for the people at Holy Trinity, that the city will restore their parking unto them. I told Father Bill I was going to pray that I was going to light a candle somewhere that the city would restore their parking. But that's a church where the civil rights movement was fought. That's a church where Z. Alexander Luby was a member. Luby pays for the altar in that church that's still there. He pays for the pulpit that's there, right? And that's a very different kind of religion than this. Because most Episcopal religion is this religion of the lost cause. Thy saints in all this glorious war shall conquer, though they die. This is a really interesting form of the great lost cause of Southern religion. And then there are songs that show up because it's pretty clear that we're not winning as much as we'd like. So, how sweet the name of Jesus sounds in a believer's ears that soothes his heart. It heals his wounds. And so there are these prayers in song for the soldiers that fall and people that are wounded in battle. Be thou my shield and hiding place, that shelter near thy side. I made my fierce accuser face and tell him, thou hast died. This really, really begins to get dark because this is what's going on in the life of a chaplain who has become a convert to this side. And so he's put all this, and then there's, of course, the 13 verses of Just As I Am. Just fabulous. Apparently they were having Baptist, altar calls in the Civil War camps, this is just great stuff. Though tossed about with many a conflict, many a doubt, with fears within and foes without. Okay, you got to hear this. Quintard is great at this. Okay, he's an educated man. He gets honorary doctorates from Cambridge, from Columbia, and New York City. He knows what he is saying. Okay, and this stuff is all over these two books. It's really, really great stuff. Jesus lives, and so shall I. We're getting long on time here. I don't want to take up too much time. But God extends grace to each returning sinner. Rebels he receives as friends. Okay, okay, and exalts to highest honor. Okay, and this is Quintard saying, okay, even if we lose, we win. And God will receive the rebels as his friends and will exalt us to high honor. This is just fabulous stuff. Servant of God, well done. This is good old Wesleyan fare. Servant of God, well done. Go forth from earth's employ. The battle fought, the victory won. Enter thy master's joy. Soldier of Christ, well done. Praise be thy new employ. And while eternal ages run, rest in thy Savior's joy. The interesting connection here, of course, is that this is doing for music in the Civil War and in America what the Wesleys did for church music in England. The Wesleys are Anglicans. They're the counterpart of Episcopalians in America. Quintard is an educated Anglican. He knows the work of the Wesleys. The Wesleys' hymns are in the Episcopalian hymn book. The prayers affected by the Wesleys are written into the American prayer books. And what the Wesleys do is they bring highbrow and lowbrow together. Okay? They will bring words that are easy to remember. Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing, my great Redeemer's praise. With highbrow music. most people say, well, it's they take bar tunes and no, they don't. They don't do that, okay? They take tunes people know, whether the tune is highbrow or lowbrow, and they fit it with theology that is easy to remember. Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing, my great Redeemer's praise. The glories of, and everybody's going like this because we all sing this song. I grew up holiness. I was born to sanctified Nazarenes in South Carolina. I was born at 7 o'clock on Wednesday night. I was in a holiness prayer meeting at 7:30. Had memorized half the book of Genesis on the way there because we had a scripture drill competition that night in the nursery. And in my mother's divorce and then her second marriage, she married a Methodist. And so we went to the Methodist church in the mornings and the little Holiness Nazarene church at night because the Methodists weren't sanctified enough to have services on Sunday night. And, you knew that you were really sanctified if you went on Sunday night. And so I go to the Methodist church with my mother and new husband, and they put me in the children's choir in this white robe, and it's got it wasn't a bow tie, it was kind of like a red Christmas bow. It just made you feel like a sissy. And they made us sing this song I had never heard in a holiness church. Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing. And I looked at my mother when we were done. I said, Mother, if I had 1,000 tongues, I'd have 2,000 eyes, 10,000 fingers, and 10,000 toes. I was a bright boy. I could do math. And my mother said, shut up, you're embarrassing the family. And I was. But I had a great time doing it. My mother sees this, she'll be embarrassed. But what the Wesleys do is they bring highbrow and lowbrow together because they say if you'll take fitting songs and good memorable theology, it will speak to people no matter their station in life. Okay? It is fitting to them because good theology is malleable. It not only works up and down the class system, it works across the events of life that come your way, whether you saw them coming or not. It works in life. If you know the Wesley hymns, it works in death. Okay? It works in triumph. It works in defeat. And this is what Quintard picks up on and puts into this manual of devotions, this mini book of common prayer with a hymnal for Confederate soldiers. And this is what they have in the camp that everybody can learn. Everybody can pray. Everybody can be prayed over, prayed to. And then Balm for the Weary and Wounded is the second one. Famous, probably more famous than the other one, although the other one got more printed more. But this one was the one that bore the blood of Leonidas Polk. Polk was carrying this he had a number of copies which he was carrying to his soldiers because things weren't going well. And so Polk is shot and his blood just flows all over the copies of this book, and they give them to the soldiers with the blood on them. And this is a fairly famous story in University of the South lore. If you've been down there to listen to I guess it's the bells are named after him, after Polk. Yeah, the Caroline's named after him. But anyway, this book is a little more difficult. There is an unseen battlefield, and now all of a sudden we're dealing with metaphor because people are dying, people are being shot. This is balm for the wounded, okay? There's no beginning with the hope of victory. There is the sense that there's an unseen battlefield, and if we're going to understand this war as best we can, we need to understand we're probably not going to win, okay? We've got to bear this out, and we've got to figure out what this means for us. And one of the ways is what does it mean to me personally? What does it mean to me internally? And there is just some really disturbing language here. One army cluster strong and fierce, their chief of demon form. If you want to know what Quintard and the rebels think of the Yankees at this point, this is what they think of them at this point, okay? That these are demons coming. These are long verses. If you have time to look through this, I really encourage you because there are things here that speak to not only this intense internal sense, but what goes on in the religion of the lost cause. This one verse here, when they win the battlefield, past toil is quite forgot, that plain where carnage once had reigned becomes a hallowed spot. And now all of a sudden the battlefield is a place of religious observance. And if you grew up in the South that I grew up in Northern Virginia, okay, you went to battlefields like you went to church. And you went to battlefield, you were taught to be respectful, you were taught songs of the battlefield. These were the field trips we went on as kids in Northern Virginia. But this idea of the religion of the lost cause means that God is not just in church. And here's what begins to happen that gets real interesting, is that God is in the places where he has been doing his work. And one of those places, according to Southerners and Northerners, one of those places, according to Americans, is now on the battlefield, and particularly the battlefield that is our ground. So when you go to the battlefield, you are on holy ground. And this is in advance of the great religion of the lost cause. Soldiers of Christ, arise, is there again, Charles Wesley. Wrestle, fight, and pray. Tread all the powers of darkness down and win the well-fought day. Servant of God, well done. This is just great stuff. Off with its fiery force, his arm has quelled the foe and laid resistless in his course the alien armies low. So God is here to work for us to lay the Union low, okay? And he's going to quell the foe with fiery force. This is great Old Testament stuff, okay? If you know, is it Isaiah 40, Isaiah 44, where the prophet says, do you not know who's around us? And we need you to get down here with fire and burn them up and kill them because they are being really mean to us. And it's this, it's this great scene in the life of Isaiah. This is what they're asking now. We're getting desperate. We need you to show up. We need you to win the battle. We need you to turn the tide. The pains of death are past. And all of a sudden you begin to see this. This is balm for the weary and the wounded. All of a sudden you begin to see the pains of death are past. And now all of a sudden there are songs we sing as we revere the dead who've died in a holy cause. The pains of death are past, labor and sorrow cease, and life's rough warfare closed at last. His soul is formed in peace. And these are the songs that we sing as the war dead are treated with the respect that they deserve. It's really, really great stuff. We could go on. There's morning and evening prayer. We don't have time to do it all, but there is great stuff here. Lamentations 3 is where the prophet says, God, come down here and curse these people and kill them with fire. And this is what he wants them to read in the morning before they're going to battle on Monday, okay? We've been to religious services on Sunday, and so on Monday when we go to battle, God, come and curse these people and kill them with fire. This is just great stuff. And, if you don't know the Bible, you miss all this stuff. But all of this stuff from Isaiah, from Malachi, this is all great Old Testament stuff. Romans 8, what can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord? Can height nor depth, principality, power, what's going to separate? Nothing. We come home in the evening from battle, and it doesn't matter how we finish that day. There is nothing that can separate us because we are on the right side from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. This is really, really fun stuff for religious historians. A couple more things here. This is the in prospect of an operation. This is a doctor's prayer, okay? And so when somebody may have to have an operation, you're supposed to start saying things over them like, free me from my tormentors and help me to drink the cup of sorrow willingly. I'm not sure what's in the cup of sorrow, but I've been in the hospital a couple times. I'd rather not drink it again, okay? Generally, you see about 8 clocks on the wall, and when you wake up, you feel really awful. But give me grace, O Lord, to yield up my will into thy hands, to trust in thee. And here you go with this Calvinist Huguenot sense, trust in thy providence rather than the skill of man. And that is both in terms of the war and also in terms of the person who's getting ready to undergo the operation in the hands of a physician. Prayers to be used by the friends or attendants of the sick when there appeareth but small hope of recovery. Not exactly a really optimistic prayer book here. Okay? And this is my favorite piece. It's at the end of this. This is a hymn for the dying. This is really fascinating. The place was bright with something of celestial light. A simple altar by the bed, a high communion meetly spread. Chalice and plate, snowy vest. We ate and drank, then calmly blessed, all mourners. One had dying breath. We sate, we were satisfied, and we talked of Jesus' death. And for him, who is both physician who deals with the dying, the wounded, the sick, but also as a priest in the church who has to bury, and by the way, if you go down the who's who list of people that are buried after the Battle of Nashville, you will see his name attending to them. If you just one of my kids, I was telling one of my kids about this at Trevecca, and he says, go on Wikipedia. Don't ever go on Wikipedia. But go on Wikipedia, look at the Battle of Nashville, and you'll start seeing names And if you start seeing those names of Confederate generals who die or Confederate commanders who die, and you go to Quintard wrote a memoir after the war, before he died. And if you go to his memoir, you'll see him saying, I went to their funeral. I wasn't at the Battle of Nashville because I was with their family burying them. And they sang this. I've never heard it sung. I've asked my musicologist friends. I've asked skinny jean wearing kids with guitars all over Trevecca's campus, how could you sing this? And they say, it doesn't fit any of the patterns. But this is Quintard's real idealism. He is at heart, and he sort of hides it well, a high church mystic. If you know the Oxford movement, you know that he and Odie shared a great deal of interest in high church mysticism and poetry, and the idea that the supernatural and the natural were often overlapping one another in the spheres where we lived. And he saw the work of the church, and perhaps this is what drove him away from medicine and into the work of religion. But he saw in this the place where heaven and earth overlapped, where God was real in the moment of life, pain, and real in eating and drinking. There's a lot of high church theology in there about the real presence of Jesus in the Lord's Supper. This is not Theology 101, and somebody ought to say amen, okay? But there's a lot of that in here that's really, really interesting. What can we learn from the past? Music is a pathway of spirituality for all people, high and low brow. Sometimes people need help on both sides. Highbrow people need to be reminded that we all need to be able to sing it, and it should make sense. And, this is one of those things. Music can go both ways. Not all Civil War music was triumphalistic, but music in the Civil War was also a means of comfort for the troubled, the dying, and the soldier. Music was a means to conversion as well as confirmation. That is to say, it's not just triumphalism, okay, but it's what do I do in the midst of life dealing with what's come my way. For the Christian priest, that would be, how do you tell a sinner they're a sinner? But for Braxton Bragg, whose life has come to nothing after Chickamauga, how do you say to him there's hope for tomorrow? So it's not just confirmation, it's conversion. It's very, very interesting. And then music is a malleable human landscape. What I mean by that, and I think this is sort of important, okay, is that music is not something that people enjoyed, but it was a way that they lived out their lives and lived their beliefs. They stood during music. They waved flags during music. They got married to music. They did operations to music. They buried people to music. They lived in music. Sometimes we think of music just as entertainment because of where we live. But music is a landscape in which people live. Music is able to project, if you tell the whole story, a unity of the story. I was trained in history by a man named Van West. Some of you may know Dr. West. And one of the very first things Dr. West ever said to me was, I think we have a good idea. We're going to call it Telling the Whole Story of the Civil War. And I said, you think you can do that? And he said, yeah, you can do that. But you've got to be patient, and you've got to look at both sides, and you've got to let both sides tell their story. If you look at music, this is really neat. You got Union, you got Confederate, you got crossover. Music is no respecter of persons. And so you can see a much bigger picture when you look at music than you can if you just look at sort of partisan politics or military action. Music has to be understood in terms of living as a living term. That is to say, what's it producing? Music is able to carry the weight of symbolism and help us understand symbolic things as being spiritual and real at the same time. And inevitably, music creates change. That is to say, songs emerge as the war changes, from triumphal expectations to dealing with the fact that things are not going so well, and we need to be able to deal with the sick and the dying and the wounded. And music changes and is able to do that with just unbelievable beauty, if we'll let it. And I think that's the end. Thank you very much.